just to figure out solutions to problems. And so I think faith and creativity coexist because God put that in every single human being. And then he activates it, especially when you get to know him.
This is Sheila's Take, a podcast where you can hear my take on everything: love, hate, relationships, family, and today's issues with a godly perspective. I'm your host, Sheila Dunbar. Thank you for joining me. Welcome. My guest today, Mr. Alan C. Paul, an author, podcaster, coach, and advocate for creatives in the realms of business, creativity, and faith. With his book, God and Gigs, Succeed as a Musician Without Sacrificing Your Faith, his podcast, The God and Gigs Show, as well as his study guides and devotionals, Alan aims to empower Christian and faith-filled creatives to be confident in pursuing their calling while excelling in their craft. Now, he balances his roles as a husband, father, musician, and entrepreneur. Alan understands the importance of integrating faith into all aspects of life. Drawing from his own experiences and expertise, he shares valuable insights on embracing a creative life, whether within or outside traditional ministry settings. With an accomplished musical background, Alan continues to compose and perform in South Florida and beyond. I am delighted to have Alan here today to discuss his journey. Alan, welcome to Sheila's Take.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I forget all the things that, that you do. And like that sounds like a great guide. It's like, wow, that was all about me. Thank you so much for that great introduction. And I'm happy to be here.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. I wanted to ask you something because when I saw your story, this kind of struck me, and I'm like, wow, that's unique. You were resigning from a position in your ministry, right? And at the same time, you were receiving a promotion simultaneously. Now, first of all, you got to tell me about that, because how did that happen? What was the reaction after, did you think about changing your mind once you heard you were getting a promotion, or tell us about that?
Yeah, it is a crazy, absolutely counter to intuition, right? Counter to logic, counter to everything, because most of us are looking for promotions, right? So to set it up, I always start by telling people, I'm four things. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a musician, I'm forgiven. So all that goes into ministry, and it goes into my life as a musician. So I was serving as a minister of music for the better part of, I guess, I've been at this particular church for about, I'd say maybe 8-9 years. But then after a while, I elevated from just a musician to minister of worship and arts. And if you're in any kind of church, that means you run everything. That doesn't have to do with preaching. If it's anything with singing, anything with dance, I was in all of it. So that was the position I basically had taken on in this church. And I loved it. I believe, and I still know that I was called at that time, at that season, to that church and to that position. However, God had other plans. And so both between, personal storms or personal things and in my life, and as well as in ministry, it became clear that God was moving me to something else. Now, he didn't tell anybody else that. He didn't tell my pastor that. He didn't tell anybody. He just told me. And I started to work on this and realize, okay, and I was fighting him for a while, but eventually God really just, in a prayer meeting in that same church, God gave me a date. He's like, you're resigning on it was June 30th. I remember the date. It was June 30th. You got to be out of there.
Wow.
Like, stop fighting me, basically. And I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a church to go to next, or a job to go to next. Nothing. I was like, okay, Lord, is this obedience? All right, this is the Abraham thing where I just got to take off and leave. So that's what happened. I went ahead and drafted my resignation letter, and I was not aware of that promotion, Sheila. I was not aware that I knew that there was a possibility that I would be elevated. And my pastor at the time was very, very generous, very kind, loved me, So this was not one of those situations where you leave someplace because you're not appreciated.
Right.
I had to leave a comfort zone. And God pushed me to the point that I had to leave the comfort zone to see what my next calling was going to be, my next assignment. And that's what happened. I did have to lay down my resignation as a sacrifice, just as I would have been promoted to senior associate, would have put me on the, whatever that's called, as far as the credentials and stuff like that, as already licensed, but that would have given me even more of a stature in that church. And I'm thankful for God pushing me, because I never would have had if I hadn't had to be obedient beforehand, I wouldn't have been able to do that. If I hadn't had to say yes to him before that letter had come, if I known that letter was coming, it would have been way harder to be obedient.
Wow. Do you think you probably would have still done it, because you have to be obedient,
I would like to say yes. I'm glad God chose the way he did it. He knows me better than I know myself. So I'm glad I didn't have to make that decision. I'm glad that I had a year. Really, I told my pastor about a year before that I felt like this was coming, but I didn't know for sure. And I didn't want to be, again, I believe in a culture of honor. I believe in respecting the man of God until it is clear that God is moving me in another direction. You follow the man of God. And until it's clear that, okay, there's a new man of God or a new woman of God or somebody else that you're going to be transferred to. And that was the walk of faith I had to do. But yes, I'm absolutely glad that I did not have to make that decision beforehand.
How do you balance your roles as a husband, a father, creative, advocate? How do you, what principles or strategies help you maintain harmony in these areas of your life?
Number one, great question. Number two, I love the words you used. You used a musical term. So as a musician, you said harmony.
See?
Yeah, there you go. We're on the same wavelength. The reason why I love the word harmony, I also like to use the word rhythm. I realized quickly, having my children early, my wife and I had 2 kids under the age of 3, and then another 5 or 6 or 7-year-olds. So we had our 3 kids and a house and a mortgage and everything by the age of like 25, 26. So we started early. We had all the things. I had the music career. I had all the things that I had to deal with. And then I also, about a couple of years into that, decided God had also asked me to become a homeschool dad. So I actually stayed home with my kids for a few years. So all of these things came to the point where we didn't try to balance. That word balance doesn't work. There were plenty of years where I was mostly involved in fathering and focusing on maybe side hustles, maybe teaching piano, but definitely nothing that involved like career being first. And that was the season for that. So the rhythm or the harmony of it was that had to be a bigger part for that season than the other part. And so to me, it's this ebb and flow that God allows us to have in our careers and in our families, where we never put this, how the food pyramid has this automatic thing where it's always the fruits and vegetables at the bottom and it's always the sweets at the top. It's like we think that life has to look like that. I'm not saying that you should ever have sweets at the bottom. I'm just saying that the idea that it's always set and this never changes, like this is the way my life looks, and it's always in this perfect shape. That's not reality. I think we all know that. So I love the fact that in my life now, being married 27 years and seeing my kids grow up, I've seen that God has used different seasons, and he says he makes everything beautiful in his time. So there's sometimes where it's beautiful to work and hustle and push and travel and do the work. And there are other seasons where it's like, nope, this is not going to work for us. We're going to pull back. We're going to live on less, or we're going to, do the countercultural thing. Like I said, either homeschool or take our kids sleeping at church because we can't afford the babysitter. So they're just going to have to go to church with us, and that be okay. It has to be okay when you see those seasons change and not think that there's this one size fits all. That's how I've done it, is realizing that it's more about harmony and flow and rhythm. And sometimes your heart beats fast because you're running fast, and sometimes you got to slow it down, and both of them are okay. That's my main thing I tell all my creatives in our groups, is not to try to do the one size fits all, but see that there's different seasons, and whatever's working for you at that time and your family, that. And eventually that benefits your career, by the way, and everything else. It all falls into alignment as long as you're not trying to, push the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, that was good. That's good. Thank you. Thank you for answering it right on. I'm glad I used the right term when I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? He's a musician. And it's funny because I used to, I used to sing in the choir, Yeah, everybody sings in the choir, even though if you can't sing, they still let you in. They
give you a solo. They give you solo. They can't hear you. Whatever.
Exactly. And that was, that was one of the things I remember my minister of music used to say all the time, okay, you gotta be in harmony, you gotta get that harmony, so but let me ask you, let's talk about your book a little bit. Can you share some insights from your book? Like what are some key themes and practical advice you offer to Christians and faith-filled creatives about
Yes.
your book?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am so grateful that that season that I just
Mm-hmm.
described was the genesis of the book. It was me realizing that I didn't know how to make it in this life
Mm-hmm.
outside of being a minister of music and outside of being a teacher, which I was for those 8, 9 years. I got a degree in jazz piano and University of Miami. And, a lot of people go out from jazz degrees and R&B and they play and they go and they
Mm-hmm.
perform. I went the opposite direction as I just described. I thought it was, oh, I'm supposed to be called to be a minister of music, which means I came and play Luther Vandross unless it's at a wedding.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
went the exact opposite. Now I'm out, as I mentioned, resigned from this church, had no idea what to do with my life other than to go back to what I remember, which was play some gigs. So Sheila, I'm at a blues
Yeah.
bar playing for $50 a night and some fish dip. And this is not going to work.
Yeah. I
It's
never
good fish
heard of
dip.
that before.
It's good fish dip. Now it's good. It's awesome, but you can't live on $50 a night.
Right. Yeah.
And I realized there's other people doing what I want to do, which is play what God gave me,
Yeah.
play this instrument, play piano, and do it well, and not feel like I'm going to go to hell if I show up in a nightclub the night before a church. And I started talking to people that knew what they were doing. I talked to people who were in Take Six, my good friend Christian Dentley. I talked to people who would perform with Donnie McClurkin, Trent Phillips. He's an MD for almost every single gospel artist you can name. But at the time he really got famous, he was working with Donnie McClurkin. He's a local South Florida person. And I called him up and I texted him. I said, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah. Yeah.
And these people gave me their interviews and I put them in the book. And so basically it became how to succeed as a musician. And I, by extension, any creative, anything really, it could be anything that you do in life, right? That's not in church. How do you succeed without sacrificing your faith? How do you do this with excellence? So the principles I came up with and distilled all from these people were 7 principles. And they spell out the word service. Stay connected to God, to your family, establish your priorities, respect the business, whatever business you're in, you got to respect it.
Right.
Visualize your goals, invest in your craft, challenge yourself to grow, and then evangelize through your gift. And I guarantee you, Sheila, that whole mandate, little 7 words, God just dropped that in me while I was getting ready for church one morning. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And it turned into the book. So that's what I share. It's how do you actually use these 7 principles to make a completely thriving creative life? And God really wants to bless all of it, whether it's your family, your career, all of it. And I think that's how he does it.
Did you get any pushback from, I'm curious, yeah, right. I bet you did.
It's interesting. I write one of the first chapters in the book, Sheila, is I write that I'm not writing to the folks that don't believe in this. I am called, I believe, to the people like me who are already out in the field. I called it Levites in the field. It was actually a little tidbit. I don't like telling people this because I think the name was off. But the original title of the book was Levites in the Field. And it came from a passage in Nehemiah 13 where the Levites, actually, because of the whole Babylonian captivity and all that kind of stuff, they weren't serving in the temple. The Levites, which we all know were like the priests that were supposed to serve,
right?
They were all out doing their job. They were just out back in the field, farming, doing all this stuff. And then Nehemiah says, hey, we're building the temple. Y'all need to come on back. But they had jobs outside of the temple. And so my whole thing was at the beginning of the book was, just because you're called to be a minstrel or psalmist or whatever this thing, you still have to pay the bills.
Right,
and only a few select people are called to full-time ministry, which means the rest of us are supposed to be working in the world, not of the world, but in the world.
In the world, right.
And doing what we do, and that includes musicians. So yes, I had to kind of turn my whatever trolls, whatever you want to call the haters, I had to turn that off.
Yeah.
Because I don't get a lot of pushback. Every once in a while, you'll see a couple of people say some crazy post about how a musician shouldn't be playing for the world. And I've learned not to react like to it, just like I wouldn't respond to people saying that, you know, that church people are only greedy or all the pastors are corrupt. Anybody that thinks that way already has already made up their mind. So it's like where the Bible says, hey, shake off the dust. That's not who I'm called to help.
But, you know, I believe, you know, it's in the word, God gives us gifts, and we are to use those gifts. You know, we are to use those gifts. So if you're in a club playing and they're like, oh, you know, hey, Alan, you're awesome. You know, where can I hear you next? You know what? Come to church Sunday morning. You can hear me there, right?
That's a great, exactly.
But, you know, he gives us these gifts. And like you said, everyone is not called for ministry, certain ministries all the time. So you have to pay the bill. So what are you going to do? Do you sit down on this gift, or do you go out and you bless others with it? So I definitely understand what you're saying. That's amazing though. I like that. Your focus is on helping creatives in the intersection of ministry and mainstream arts and entertainment industry, right? Can you elaborate on how faith and creativity can coexist in those realms?
I love this question, Sheila. And thank you so much for, like, I can tell that, you know, you are thinking like I'm thinking, which is, do these things, can they even connect? And that's the way I try to remind people. God is the ultimate creator. There's a term that I got from another book that calls us sub-creators. We're not the creator, but when he gave us, you know, Adam and Eve and all that in the garden, he gave us jobs and he gave us the gift. Adam's first job was to be creative, name the animals, right?
Right.
So I believe that there is an element of God's creativity that he literally said to every single person, just like the 10 talents, right? He said, I'm giving you something, do something with it. So it takes faith. It takes imagination to even be creative. And now I work mostly with people in the performing arts and entrepreneurs, right? That's kind of like where it came from, musicians to really just anybody in the arts and entertainment space. But you got to be creative to be a mom. You got to be creative to be like, especially nowadays, you have to be creative just to figure out solutions to problems. And so I think faith and creativity coexist because God put that in every single human being. And then he activates it, especially when you get to know him. There's a great quote I love, which says that painting, arts, I kind of paraphrasing, I have a new sense of these things since I got saved. So when you're saved, you start to enjoy art more. You start to see more creative things. You start to understand, like nature becomes like, oh my gosh,
you
not only is
appreciate
it
it more.
Right. So it opens the door. So I really think creatives in general, but then really everybody, we can see better what God has made us to create when we know him. And then it inspires you to not just stick with the same old, like you got like, all right, he didn't stick with the same old. He put his foot in it when he made a flower. He made like stuff to the nth degree beautiful. So why don't we go and make it just as beautiful, or make it just as interesting, or make it just as lovely? That's where faith comes in. He gave us that ability. So you got to have faith in yourself that God put something in you to create something beautiful. So I think that's where those two things intersect. It's whether you're an artist, whether you're a musician, you got something put inside you, but sometimes we put the fire out, right? Comparison, whatever. So I think that's how that connects. I think people, obviously everybody can create. God has given all of us a measure of that. But once you know God, I think it should challenge you to go out and do even more with whatever that creative thing is. That's how I think those two things intersect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right now. As a musician and a composer yourself, how do you find inspiration and continue to excel in your craft?
As a musician, we're speaking right now around Christmas time. So, Lord, this is the time where everything is challenged. Between playing for a church, the children's program, and then the wedding here and the thing. And the inspiration is, the struggle is to make sure, it kind of like what I just said about faith and creativity, is to remember that it's not all hustle. It's not all just to check the box or compare myself to other creatives, other musicians that are releasing albums or do so. The challenge is to be creative with what God has given me and my way of performing, singing, playing, whatever it is that you do. Like, it's got to be for me, and it's weird to say this, sounds selfish. It's got to be for me and for the people that I'm called to reach and the audiences I'm called to reach. So there are certain songs that I have not released yet, but I know I got to release those songs whether anybody listens or not. I can't be worried about, oh, well, what if it doesn't sell? How do I get the money for it? What if, what am I trying to be like the next Beyonce? Like, you can't worry about that. You have to go ahead and put the music out, put the stuff out. And that's where I'm at. The inspiration comes from, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here. And it makes no sense for me to have these songs and yes. So to me, that's it. That's what's inspiring me right now, to be honest with you, because it's hard to imagine that, oh, well, there's so many artists and so many people on Spotify and YouTube. And it's hard to imagine that you can make an impact. But if I make an impact on just one person, then I've done my job. And then I let God decide how far that goes. But if I hold on to it like the one talent, then I've decided it's not going anywhere. That's the inspiration, is to say, hey, even if it's just a half an idea, even if it's just a half a song I used to write back in college, I used to do this. And there's songs right now that I'm like, I'm okay, it's time to get this out. Like, I've been sitting on it too long. And that's the inspiration, is to realize that if it's an idea, it's worth sharing. It's not about me. It's about the person that might enjoy it.
Yeah. I think you do a disservice to others when you don't share your gifts. I really do, because there are so many people out there that are so talented that can give God the glory and do so many things, but that they're afraid to do it, or like me starting this podcast. I was like, you know what, I was afraid, but someone told me, just do it afraid, and because this is something, if God puts it in your heart, he's not going to first of all, you're not going to fail. If he gives you the vision, you are not going to fail. He will lead you and show you how it needs to be done. So, but how do you integrate your belief system into your work and guide others in doing the same?
This is where, again, I think the way I was led into this space kind of answers the question better than I can, right? So if you look at my whole life, I started as a musician, as I mentioned, pianist, then got into teaching, then went into ministry, then was called basically to do what I call part-time everything, right? So I'm now in ministry. Now I podcast. Now I write. I'm an author. I'm a coach. So I just show people my path, and I remind them that just like my path, one of my favorite scriptures is Psalm 25:10. All the paths, plural, paths of the Lord are full of mercy to such that keep his commandments. And I love the plural paths, because most of us do not take a single direction. Now, I'm not talking about the way to God through Jesus. I'm talking about all the ways that we go in life. And there's so many varying paths. So what I do to help other creators in our group, God and Gigs 360, which is our membership and also our free Facebook group, what I do is I really try to show people all these different paths, including the interviews, where we've got people that have started as full-time musicians, and now they're full-time entrepreneurs, or they're people who, one young lady I just interviewed in London, she's a pediatrician, but she also started her own music academy, and she's also singing. She's doing exactly. See, so telling people other stories is what helped all of us realize, oh, there's a path for me too. There's a path to creative. Now, I may not become a full-time creative, but there's a way that I could do it. This person did it. This person in my group, I remember right now, she's one of my favorite people. She's a trumpet player, but she's also a what does she do? Like a marketing expert for like brands, like Shaq's brand and all this kind of stuff. And yet she's pursuing her music. So these are the stories I like to tell on the podcast, so that people see that there's a way to integrate it all. So they see they can be a Christian, and they can still be a musician, an artist, a creative. They could work in the mainstream. Because if I just give them like answers from me, that might not make their path. But if I show them a variety of people that have done it and are doing it at high level, now it's like, oh, there's lots of ways I could do this. There's lots of solutions. And in the group, they can talk to each other, right? That's why the membership is so important for me. They can talk to each other. So if I don't have the answer, I always tell people, if I don't have the answer, I'm going to find the person that does.
Wow. What advice do you have for aspiring Christian creatives who may be struggling to find their place of balance in the faith and artistic expression?
Great question. I would say the first thing, honestly, is to what I call, I say this in this masterclass, and it's like the one thing everybody has to do, and that is recognize the value of your creative calling.
Ooh, yeah.
Because to recognize, if you don't recognize, it's just like if you have like a precious jewel and you think it's like, fake, and you throw it out, you're like, oh, well, it doesn't matter how valuable it is if you don't recognize it.
You don't recognize it. Yeah.
So to anybody that's aspiring, I first have to tell them, hey, what you have, your idea is valuable because you are valuable. There's this thing in my devotional, Your Art, God's Heart, that I say, it talks about being gifted. A lot of us growing up as musicians and artists, we hear, oh, you're so gifted, you're so gifted. But the problem is people call the gift, the playing, gifted, but they don't really think about you being a gift. Ooh. The person is a gift. So you have to recognize the value of what God put inside you and you personally. And then the third section is, all right, now that you recognize the gift, you recognize that you're a gift. Now you have to give that gift away. The aspiring artist, that's again, most of the people that I'm dealing with is they're struggling with the doubt, right? Yeah. No one's going to buy it. No one likes it. No one's following me on Instagram. It's like all these things. So the first thing I tell them is go ahead and just take a small bet on yourself. Go ahead and start the lives, release the song, go to an open mic, do the small thing, because those small steps is what reminds you again that you're not alone. Right. Not everybody's going to hate you. You might have some bumps and bruises where people don't like your song and you don't get any response, but you still, the win is you still took the step. Yes, exactly. That's really the toughest part. Once you go those first couple of steps and you meet people that actually like, and I believe God puts those people in your path. It's just steps of faith, right? So then he introduces you to somebody that does believe in your vision or does see what you want to do and does want to help you. That's what this group is existing for. Like, just to make sure those people who are taking those small steps find that person to help them. So that's the number one thing. Recognize your value and then find some people who will help you. Yeah, you got to find some Davids. You got to find some Jonathans. You got to get some people that will stand alongside you, because otherwise, it's hard to do it by yourself. It absolutely is. That's my number one thing of advice.
Like-minded people. Get some people around you that's gonna help you and do what you got to do.
100%. Can
you give my audience a sneak peek into the topics and discussions covered on your podcast? What can listeners expect, and how can they benefit from their creative journeys?
I love this. So the sneak peek is over 260 episodes later. Ooh, I can tell you, right. I know, like it's amazing. I don't know how I survived this long or how people want to listen to my voice this long. But the sneak peek is, honestly, I am so excited about every time we have an artist on, a musician on, whether it's someone that's a Grammy winner, Emmy winner, or even probably more inspiring are the people that have just taken that first step. Yeah. So what they're always going to hear is they're going to hear somebody that has taken some type of unique path to connect their faith with their creativity and pursue what God has put in their life. So they might listen to a Tia Goins, who she was a country artist who had been like in the regular kind of, been all the arts, all the tours and stuff. But God told her to stop and write her own songs. And she had a whole new lease on life. Or you might hear from a bass player, my friend Tasia, who her first gig, when she accepted this gig, was to play for Janelle Monáe in the White House and met Barack Obama, like her second gig. Like
a just second gig? Wow.
Second, I think it was her first or second gig. And she just accepted the call. She's like, okay, I'll take it. So saying yes to God, they're going to hear examples of people like them who took that small step, and suddenly God opened up this big world to them. And then here's the second half. They're going to hear how to keep it going. They're going to hear, oh, once I accepted this, or once I found this, here's what I did to maintain it or sustain it, right? Because it's great to have a great big door of open opportunity and these great stories. Is another thing to keep it. And most of the people, unfortunately, in the arts, we hear about these bad stories, right? The people where are they now? And why they got this, and this marriage failed, or this drug addiction. And so that's the second half. They will always hear something actionable on how do you keep this in your life. So we touch all kinds of topics, all the way from faith to creativity to marriage to really just entrepreneurship. But anytime you listen, you're going to hear somebody's perspective on this is how God has called you to be a creative that he created you to be.
Well, why is it important for Christian creatives to embrace their calling and excel in their craft?
Why is it important? I would say 4 words: because somebody needs you. Because somebody needs you. If I had not listened to those first few people who had encouraged me to go ahead and write the book, and this is almost, I'm trying not to be all emotional on your podcast and be all blubbery, okay? But here I am sitting.
You can be. You can. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be a man. I got real men cry. But as I sit here right now talking to you and realize that I have 3 children that still like their dad. I have a wife of 27 years who still loves me. I have a position at my church. I now am kind of full-time ministry all over again at my current church after I left and walked away. 3 days later, I got a call to my current church where now I don't only do music and worship, but I also help produce their podcast.
Wow.
So if I had not produced the God and Gigs show, I would not have the position I have now at my church, where I now have 2 podcasts that I work with. And it's like, God, thank you so much for putting a few people in my path that didn't let me give up on my dream. Because now somebody else can say, hey, my devotion inspired you. And I don't say this to brag. I'm bragging on God.
No.
When people say, one young lady of artist, you can go look at my YouTube and you'll see some of the shorts where I post some of this stuff, where she says, I was getting ready. I was rededicating my life to God and she was already an amazing artist. But then she says, and I needed your book and your devotional. And she read my devotional to help. I mean, I can't take credit for that. That's all God. But if I had given up and somebody had not inspired me, I don't get to inspire them.
Exactly.
And they don't get to inspire the next person. So that's why it's so important to follow your calling, because somebody is on the other side of that. God has positioned somebody else on the other side waiting for you to accept it. That's why it's so important.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Lastly, what are you grateful for?
Oh my gosh, how could I? If I could tell it all, right? If I had 10,000 tongues. I'm grateful for right now. I'll just say that I'm grateful for every moment, as hard as it's been, the moments where I thought that this was a pipe dream, the moments that the money wasn't there.
Yeah.
I'm learning to be grateful in the season that I'm in right now. What I'm calling it lately is the grace for the season I'm in right now. Because the grace for the season that I am right now is a compound interest of all the grace that he's given me before. Now, I know his grace is new every morning, right? And I know we're going to try not to be preachy. But that's what I'm grateful for right this minute. Because if I look back, I can be grateful for everything, but I don't necessarily have to look back. I can just look at right now.
That's right.
And everything I have right now is because of everything I've gone through. So I don't even have to necessarily look at my past. I can look at my present and see that my past has already been activated into making me who I am right this minute, and is allowing me to go into my future. So I'm just grateful I get to talk to you right this moment and sit on this Zoom. Like, I'm not saying that to be funny, because it does encompass my wife, my children, my books, my podcast, my church. Like, all of it is right here in this moment that God's allowed me to have. And so I'm thankful for the moment that God gave me to be able to come on your podcast and share what God has put in God and Gigs. I'm grateful for that.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate you so much, Alan. And I thank you for taking the time to stop by my little podcast and share your journey with my listeners. I want my listeners to go out and get your book, God and Gigs, Succeed as a Musician Without Sacrificing Your Faith, and listen to your podcast, The God and Gigs Show, right? Is that, where is it? They can stream it anywhere, right?
Anywhere, exactly. Any podcast app, the one they're using right now. If you just finished it, number one, before they do that, they need to subscribe. If you just picked up this podcast and you weren't already a Sheila's Take fan, you should have subscribed by now, okay?
That's
subscribe to
right.
hers first. Let's give honors due.
That's right.
Subscribe to her podcast. But then, yes, on that same app, God, one God, God and Gigs, plural. So God and Gigs, Gigs show. And they'll find it anywhere. They can also go to the website, godandgigs.com, and they'll see everything about a membership. And the other devotional, by the way, if you're not a musician, my devotional, Your Art, God's Heart, really speaks more generally
Okay.
So they might want to check out the devotional, because I know not everybody's a musician, but if they want something that really works for anybody that's in the creative entrepreneurial space, they can pick up Your Art, God's Heart.
Oh, okay. Well, again, I thank you, Alan, for stopping by my Sheila's Take podcast. And I wish you the best, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep encouraging the creatives out there, because that's what we need. Thank you so much. God bless.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Join me next time where I will continue to discuss more of today's issues. I'm your host, Sheila Dunbar. Blessings to you.